Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos recently voted the 7 billionth most popular man on the planet. Thank you for everyone who voted for me. And by which I mean, of course, my parents and myself. Well, this week's episode of Musical Talk reflects an observation I've only just recently made in the last few years, actually. I don't know what it's like where you live. No, I really don't know what it's like where you live. But where I am, in West London, I've noticed that November is a tremendously good time for Gilbert and Sullivan productions. Much to my surprise, there always seems to be a plethora at this time of year. It's almost, if you like, a pre-Christmas treat before we get into the pantomime season, which of course starts earlier than it ever has done at the beginning of December. And without having done any research at all, and just from the grapevine and people telling me things, I know that last week you could have seen The Yeoman of the Guard in West London. I know that The Gondoliers is coming up, and most excitingly of all, Utopia Limited is going to be on at the Greenwich Theatre at the beginning of the month. Utopia Limited being one of the very rarely performed Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. Now, I'm not going to pretend to tell you that I know any reason why November should particularly prove to be a rich month of Gilbert and Sullivan, but for me, any excuse to talk about the Savoy operas and the marvellous people who made them is not to be sniffed at. And this week and next week we're going to be talking about one of the operetta in depth. Well, now I've got your undivided indifference, it's probably worthwhile me telling you which of the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta I'm going to be talking about. Well, you may have picked up in conversations I've had with other people over the course of the last year that Ruddigore is my favourite musical, and that last year Ruddigore, which was 124 years old at the time, celebrating its 125th year this year therefore, was having a marvellous year, in fact probably the second most marvellous year in its entire existence. Its happiest year, of course, was the year it was created, 1887, but for some not at all fathomable reason, in 2011, there were lots of different professional and amateur versions of Ruddigore on all over the country. Why, in London alone, I was able to see over 10 different performances comprising of 6 or 7 different productions. And of course we had the famous Opera North version, which had done so well in the North, it had come down to London's Barbican Centre and had a highly celebrated run there, where I had the pleasure of seeing it twice. It was also broadcast on BBC Radio 3. Well, one of the other great productions was by the Centenary Company, who put it on a year ago at the Greenwich Theatre. And that, as always, was directed by an old friend of this programme, Jerry Pennell, and so I sat down with him to talk about the story of this fascinating Gilbert and Sullivan opera, and it really is. It's completely unlike any of its brothers. It has a very, I have to say, in speech marks, checkered, close speech marks, history, in the fact that it has waxed and waned in popularity to a much greater extent than almost any of the other ones in the canon. But it is much loved by true aficionados. And in this conversation today, we'll be talking about some of the background and some of the issues you have to consider if you're going to be putting on a production. It's a true director's conversation today. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jerry Pennell as we discuss Ruddigore, or The Witch's Curse. Musical Talk. Jerry, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me again here on Musical Talk. You're an old hand here.
Indeed.
And an old friend of Musical Talk. And one of the areas that you are an expert in is Gilbert and Sullivan. And last year there was a great fusing together of your originality with, in my view, the greatest of the Gilbert and Sullivan Savoy operas, Ruddigore. And there was a lot of competition as well, because as listeners to Musical Talk will know, I saw 7 totally different productions over the course of 2011, which suggests to me that Ruddigore was having the best year of its run ever since it opened. So my question to you, I think, Jerry, is, as you were behind the Greenwich Theatre version, why Ruddigore?
Well, in the particular case of the Centenary Company, it was one that they hadn't done before. They do specialise in Gilbert and Sullivan. They've been going for about 15 years, and this was one of the relatively few that they hadn't tackled before. One reason for that is that technically it's more demanding than other shows by Gilbert and Sullivan, and we've been in Greenwich Theatre for 5 or 6 years now. We've grown in confidence in using that space and in appreciating how we can overcome the technical challenges of producing something in that space, which is, as I said, relatively demanding, 2 completely different sets, what you might call special effects in terms of ancestral portraits coming to life, and so we sort of felt we were ready to tackle it.
Ready for Ruddigore.
Indeed.
Now, actually, you make a very good point, because it is Ruddigore is the musical, the Gilbert and Sullivan opera, as you say, where the ghosts, people step out of their portraits in a picture gallery, and that is a technical feat. And the Greenwich Theatre is unusual, isn't it? It is not a standard proscenium arch theatre. There's very little wing space.
There's no wing space on one side at all. Basically, a big corner of stage left is missing, owing to nearby houses. So when devising scenery, you have to work out, well, either there isn't going to be any stage left entrance, or if there is, then it has to be quite a complex arrangement for getting people around the back of the stage without being pointed at by members of the audience saying, look at the funny man.
And of course, not having curtains, or flies. No. You can't drop scenery in.
Nope.
You can't hide scenery by closing the curtains and dragging things off. So essentially, you've got to build the environment. When I say the set, I mean the set as a 3D environment, not just as a flat.
Yes.
Which meant that and as you say, like most Gilbert and Sullivans, Act 1 takes place in one place, and Act 2 takes place in a different place. But because that second place has also got to have a functional set that allows you to have people stepping out of it because of the pictures, that's quite a difficult circumstance. So, because we've spoken about this privately, you and I, for years, both loving Ruddigore and wondering when it might come our way, it was the resolution to that problem that was one of the triggers that allowed you to do it.
Yes, it was really just, we'd done in Greenwich a couple of other shows that required changes. Some GNS you can do with a single set, which is nice and easy. Others we try. Yeah, haven't done that one yet though. But others require a degree of alteration
and versatility.
Versatility. So, do you have a set that somehow revolves? I mean, we'd love to have a revolving stage, but sadly not available. So, do you have individual pieces of scenery that can be spun round? Should they be spun round as actually part of the action itself, with cast members spinning them round, or should you do it as a scene change between the acts? Albeit that does mean that members of the audience who don't go to the bar during the interval will be able to see your stage crew.
And if they're me, they can wave to them.
Yeah, indeed. And then professional stage crews, of course, don't wave back. So we just sort of tried different ways of doing things. When we did the Grand Duke a few years ago, that was a change that actually took place with the actors doing it themselves, but because the Grand Duke is largely a play about actors, it sort of made sense. Yes, exactly. Previously we'd done a production of Patience. We did have a single set, but we sort of effected set changes by use of lighting, and again by having a couple of stage crew dressed as a butler and a maid who would dress the set, that section of the set accordingly. But this couldn't be done really in that way, so it was going to be a complete change of spinning things round, having flats folded against each other, so they then unfolded and revealed a different set behind, all on a very tight budget, but we just about managed it. All ended up being a bit heavier than planned, but that all adds to the fun. Well,
as you say, you had to have the crew rather than the cast, because nothing would, because bearing in mind Ruddigore is about ghosts and the supernatural, nothing stops something seem ephemeral and ghost-like if it's having to put his shoulder into the set to move it around.
Indeed, quite.
But I tell you what's always been one of the difficulties, of course, is that the first act takes place in the village of Red Herring in Cornwall.
Exterior scene, of course, right. So nice and bright.
House fronts and things like that.
Yeah.
And the second scene, of course, is in a dark, panelled, stately home, essentially, an accursed stately home. And you've got the portraits on the walls in this in this gallery, and the ghosts step out and then down from them. And so I thought there was a very clever wheeze, really, I thought, which is that as Cornwall is famous for flooding, it's highly likely that houses would have steps up to their front door, which meant that you could have the hole on one side, which was the front door, when it was the street set, is also high enough off the ground to look like a portrait, which isn't resting on the ground, i.e. it's actually hung on the wall, when you turn the set round to reveal them as portraits. And I really like that. I thought that worked beautifully, because it didn't look odd that the houses had steps.
Thank you. I'm going to claim that was a deliberate decision, and it was all based on flooding, and was nothing to do with the fact that we just had to have them a couple of feet in the air, as you say. So it didn't look like they were at ground level, and that just meant having a few steps up.
But I'd had, funnily enough, been to Cornwall earlier in that year, where they had flooding in the place I'd been to.
Yeah.
And many of the houses were.
As you say, yes, it would make sense,
yeah.
especially in harbour town as well, because it's a fishing village.
It is. Good. Well, we are as one on that. Splendid. But there are technical aspects to it, and as I say, that's more complicated than most GNSs.
Yes, I mean GNS, by most modern standards, is quite straightforward from a technical point of view. There's generally speaking unless you're an annoying director who decides to muck about with things, there is just one set per act, sometimes just one set per show. There's no vamp to already moments in the music to facilitate set changes behind the scenes.
Although Ruddigore once it does have a vamp in a sense, which we'll talk about later.
Yes.
In the drama later on, there's a piece of backing music, isn't there, which has to last as long as the fight scene.
Yes. Well, that is, of course, the basis of melodrama being called melodrama, because of the music. It was sort of the first, as far as I'm aware, the first type of drama to have background music that
mood-inducing incidental
exactly
music,
it was all to heighten the emotions and reinforce the dramatic tension.
Yeah. What we would call incidental music, which we take absolutely for granted on television all the time now. But as you say, yes, and so there's that kind of music, but that's a vamp essentially. I mean, it's written,
absolutely, yes,
but it has to stop at a particular moment.
Yes,
so
yes.
It's got several jumping off
under
points.
the dialogue to culminate in a.
And in the rest of the Gilbert and Sullivan canon, I was just trying to think of other what you might call special effects opportunities. And apart from the teapot summoning up the underworld, if you like, in The Sorcerer, really nothing else is springing to mind.
That's about it, apart from the odd bit of transformation into fairies in Iolanthe, depending on how you stage that. And of course, the fact that the fairies themselves are lit up beautifully.
By which you mean
illuminated.
Well,
quite.
Well, it depends on what kind of production you're visiting. But having mastered the technical difficulties, Ruddigore became a goer.
Yes, so there's the technical side of things. I think it's more of a challenge as well in terms of acting. Certainly for amateurs, it's quite demanding to play something that is deliberately done in a slightly heightened style, a melodramatic style, without actually just appearing to be a bad melodramatic actor. So that's always been something that, when you're working with an amateur group, and I'm an amateur director myself, you keep your fingers crossed that you've got the right people to be able to fill the roles.
It's heightened, isn't it?
It's heightened, yes. And so, yes, you need a sympathetic bunch of actors.
Yes. So there are all these things which make Ruddigore a difficult piece to put on.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, it hasn't been put on nearly as much. And of course, it's also the unfortunate Gilbert and Sullivan from the original run, which is sort of identified as a failure. So we're more than 125 years on from its opening night now, and yet at the same time, there's this sense, is there not, that it's the runt of the litter.
It varies in its reputation, I think, over the years. There were a few that didn't get revived in Gilbert and Sullivan's lifetime, and I think in Ruddigore's case there was a plan to revive it, but because Gilbert had one of his periodic arguments with the producers.
Passing.
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, in this case, the person who was passing was the person who was going to produce that show, well, the new show, and then was going to do revivals of a few of the unrevived Savoy operas. So it didn't get revived till the 20s, and I think then once it had been, albeit in an adapted and some would say butchered version, it became pretty much part of the D'Oyly Carte canon, I think, and probably yes, I don't think it was really regarded then at that point as being in any way inferior to the others. But since then, maybe its reputation's waned a bit. But then, to be honest, there aren't that many Gilbert and Sullivans now that are regarded as being mainstream hits. It's really
Yeah.
just Pirates, Penzance and Mikado, and all the others, I think, as far as the general public are concerned, and even the average musical theatre goer are concerned, are sort of
Other ones.
other ones. And so something like Iolanthe or Patience in particular, which was a massive hit at the time, being a parody of the aesthetic cult, now I think would be regarded, much as on a par with Ruddigore.
And yet, for example, Gondoliers was actually in the West End in the 80s.
True.
Yes. It's only in the last 20, 30 years that they've seemed to have levelled out, as you say, between A grade and others. But there's no one but they're all in the B grade now.
Yes.
So there's no C grade either.
No,
things
no.
like the Grand Duke and Utopia Limited are back in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all very strange. So I think it's going to be instructive, actually, to talk about the differences between Ruddigore when it opened in 1887 and its revival, I think, in the early 20s, as you say.
Yes.
I think it's 23, 24, because the first recording is 24. And I believe it was sent out on tour with the doily cart before it came to London. They road tested it literally on the road before it came anywhere near London. But all the contemporary accounts seem to say we can't understand why this was deemed a failure on its original run. So why do you think that the original failure, it was deemed to be a failure?
Well,
what did they do to change it?
One possible reason is that it wasn't the Mikado. It was a successor to the Mikado, and it's difficult now to think of anything comparable. It was just such a
Phantom of the Opera.
Well, yeah, basically,
when it
yes.
opened.
Although I'm not even sure there was that much memorabilia, for example, about the Phantom of the Opera. I mean, it not just in musical theatre terms, but like a hit film, Star Wars almost, in terms of the way it just dominated every element of popular culture. And so something had to succeed it, and Ruddigore did. I think that one reason why now, and even in the 20s, why something that was seen as a problem in the 1880s was that of all the sort of targets for Gilbert to choose, he chose melodrama, and sort of the particular type of melodrama that you got in rather dodgy theatres on the south bank of the Thames.
Unrespectable period
During
of
the
Victorian theatre.
Yes, sort of
30 years beforehand.
Yes. So people then thought, well, this is a bit weird. This sort of thing's on the way out anyway. Of all the things to take as your subject and have a pop at, it's a rather strange one. I think possibly one reason why he did it was because he actually quite loved that unsophisticated type of drama.
And yet, bizarrely, of course, he was right, because melodrama is still with us. It's on film now, but...
Well, it's true. I mean, and it did... I think that a key way that people... I think really it's remained very recognisable, and it probably was silent movies that did it, and silent movies have had an influence, of course, on the rest of cinema, but it's all that heightened emotion and heightened terror.
Anything with a pirate in it, for a start.
Well, quite. So I think that come the 20s, already, if all Savoy operas are dated, then the fact that one was already dated in 1888, yes, wasn't so much of a big deal, and I think certainly now that's not regarded as being any sort of handicap. So that's another reason why it was felt to be a bit odd. Also, Victorian sensibilities were possibly a bit tweaked, yes, by the subject matter of ghosts, and certainly towards the end of physical resurrection of ghosts.
And it's funny, I really want to dwell on this, because this is something that's only become more and more apparent to me as I've got older. I sometimes have to think of Gilbert, it's to a good church-going British public, which you would have had in that sort of ripe mid to late Victorian era.
Yes.
The idea that in a frivolous comic opera, and Gilbert and Sullivan were writing comic operas, that at the end, resurrection of mere mortals was not, perfectly possible and happened. It wasn't just one, but the whole picture gallery comes back to life due to a splendid Gilbertian concept. but they shouldn't have died in the first place, and therefore they are all alive.
Yes.
But that's so. If you believe in the the divinity of resurrection and that kind of thing, that's a real society-shaking concept at a level. And if Gilbert's already known as being a bit of a man who likes to poke Victorian society in the eye with a sharp stick, you can't even pretend that it's just inadvertent consequences. It looks like a deliberate attempt to be provocative, and provocative it was. And it's so right. Here's a question: then. Is Gilbert the Sex Pistols of his day? Is he a punk?
I think he's just a bit more of an iconoclast. I think he probably would have said,
"Don't be silly.
Don't be silly. It's only theatre."
Yes.
After all, he also did.
Fool.
Yes, he did a lot of plays involving fairies.
Yeah. And no one took them seriously.
No one took them seriously. I mean, that was just a key thing of Victorian culture that they were obsessed with fairies. I sometimes wonder whether that's to do with men liking the idea of women who are a bit mysterious, but basically
basically female, but
yes,
with wings.
Yes, quite. That you didn't have to try to understand.
Yes.
And nobody complained about that.
And indeed, the coming back to life at the end is done in an absolutely non-churchy way.
Yes,
There's
and
nothing churchy about Ruddigore.
No, and lots of... Well, actually, of course, there is a lot of piety. I mean, possibly, I'm surprised more people weren't offended by the very pious couple of Sir Despard and Mad Margaret when they are reformed and are very sober in their nature.
Yes.
And in their song, in which they describe very po-facedly all the things that they do, and in their new reformed lives, they did originally sing, or were to originally have sung, in fact, we rule a Sunday school, but he bottled it, basically, and went for, in fact, we rule a national school, which was a type of school.
A secular school.
A secular school, yes.
Therefore, right for poking fun.
And then, well, yes, that was acceptable.
It's okay for school to be dull. In fact, it's a continued trope.
So I think, if anything, it was just that Gilbert... And I think it was only a relatively small element of the audience who felt that this was unseemly. But nevertheless, a few did. And probably Gilbert just didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Because he did tend to be... a little bit self-censoring when he saw that, for the sake of one line, he might get a backlash.
Yeah.
He'd excise the line.
He wasn't after a drubbing, was he?
No, exactly. I think that if anything, there was more of an outcry just with some people who found the ending weak.
Well,
quite regardless of being offended by it. Offended by it on grounds of quality, which I disagree with, and I'm sure you disagree with as well. It's a typical Gilbert logical twist at the end, or a logical solution to a problem.
It's one of his neatest, I think.
I think it is very neat, but
if you've got a lawyer's mind, if you like
exactly.
logic,
it
is a perfect ending.
It is.
It's not emotionally satisfactory at all.
No, and I think, of course, it is in that it achieves the end.
It resolves lots of couples marrying.
Yes, exactly. It means that you have a happy ending all round. But there was, and I think again, these days, and even in the 1920s, your Gilbert and Sullivan audience sort of know what to expect. I mean, they did then. I mean, this was their 9th opera, I think. So
they had form.
So people did know what to expect, but nevertheless, there's the fact that in the 1920s, and certainly now, if you go to a Gilbert and Sullivan opera, you probably are going to be the sort of person who is amused by witty twists and logical leaps, which get you out of a tricky situation with one elegant bound, and so no one's going to find an ending which does just that. Troublesome. Yeah. Whereas in the Victorian era, perhaps people thought, this is, rather than admiring an elegant get out, they just thought it was a cop out.
Yes. Didn't see the subtlety in it.
No, indeed.
Yes. And it had an unfortunate title originally.
It did, indeed.
Not to our ears, and indeed not by the 1920s either, I think.
No.
But it was Ruddigore with a Y.
With a Y.
Which suggested the word bloody, of course.
It did, indeed.
which, of course, in Victorian view is a swear word.
A terrible swear word. And actually that remained a swear word, really, for...
when I was a boy.
Indeed, yes, well into
my bloody mother bloody wouldn't let me bloody well say it.
Yes, I don't know where to go from that. Where were we?
But the Victorians didn't like it at all.
No.
And so it was changed almost immediately, I think, to Ruddigore
within a week.
Yeah,
And that appeared to mollify people, which just goes to show in a way how...
put up it was by the papers.
Well, almost, or just how sort of flimsy this Victorian morality outrage was.
A little bit of set dressing, you could change it all.
Yes, I mean, having said which, I do think the I makes it a more elegant
word.
Yes, it is a more elegant title because it's almost subtle. It's not quite subtle. It's still called Ruddigore, but
well, I think the I makes it a meaningless title because obviously it's the House of Ruddigore, but it's not even the surname of the aristocratic family. It's the House of Ruddigore, and they are the Murgatroyds. So Ruddigore actually has very little.
Yes, but
meaning before you know what the story is.
But it looks like a good old word for a house of.
Of a different kind of ill repute to the one that people think of. Yes, right.
It sort of sounds like a good family name, even though, as you say, it's not the family name. And it's only if you look at it for 2 seconds that you think, oh yes, actually that says Ruddigore. Oh, it's about red blood.
Which is what melodrama was.
Well, indeed. And I just think the I makes it a teeny bit more subtle than if you see the word Ruddigore with a Y, which makes it absolutely clear.
But let us not be too precious about this, because both you and I do think there are weaknesses in the libretto. We think Act 1 is very good. In fact, it was considered to be very good at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the reviews after Act 1 were remarkable. The interval crowd were very pleased.
Yes.
It was deemed to have lost its way in Act 2, and whilst I don't think Act 2 is a disaster by any means, it is, I think, a little bit one note. But what's your view on Act 2? Because that is where the weakness is. Yes.
Yes, controversial. I think in a way the whole show is a little bit difficult to pin down. It starts off. You go along and it's called Ruddigore, so you think, and possibly you have a poster which emphasises the dark and bloody nature of the proceedings.
Ghosts, stately home,
indeed, and
large red letters.
That's the stuff. And then immediately, once you're past the overture, whichever version you do, they're both full of
pep
and verve. Yes, you get this bright and breezy opening number. A lot of bridesmaids come on and trip about and sing how they're looking forward to finally somebody getting married off in this village. And for the first half hour, you're into basically a sort of Jane Austen type romantic triangle.
It's a agrarian idyll, not a million miles away from Patience.
Indeed, yes.
In fact, it could be almost the same place.
And also similar to The Sorcerer, if we're going to pick on our previous Gilbert and Sullivan, or their previous collaborations. Village setting and as I say, nice sort of bright music and
clean
bright
cut
setting.
Types.
Indeed. Now, of course, these clean cut types are, in fact,
shams.
They're all very selfish in one way or another.
Shams.
They're either disguised wicked baronets or heroic jolly Jack Tars who will betray their...
no one is what they purport to be.
No.
Not one character.
No, the very... or they are perversions of what they would be.
And indeed, they're all... and this is hard to realise now, but there were set tropes and stereotypes in theatrical melodrama in the mid-19th century. There was always a good sailor, there was always a bad baronet, and these characters would always be good. They wouldn't be bad. And, an innocent damsel and this kind of stuff. And you've got all these tropes, but they're all not doing what they would do if they were in a legitimate melodrama.
The question is it that they aren't doing what they would do, or is Gilbert actually... He's making them do what they would do, but to the nth degree. He's taking it to the extreme, because although we're not familiar now with necessarily all of the melodramatic, we just said that we are in terms of silent moves and that sort of thing. But yes, there are some sort of subtleties of the, if that's the right word, of the melodramatic tradition that are now lost. But certainly, as I said, it's got a sort of Jane Austen type feel because it's set around the time of the Napoleonic Wars. And so you have,
getting on the Regency stuff.
So you have your heroine, who you can recognise out of any number of Jane Austen adaptations, and like a good Jane Austen heroine, she is sort of prim and proper, and quite demure. But
she's
Gilbert,
even called Rose for
yeah,
sake,
indeed. But she sort of takes this to the extreme, and sort of Gilbert saying that yes, you're used to seeing these very demure and prim and proper and sort of admirable, not sort of flighty, certainly not wanton, anything but that. You're used to seeing these women in drama, yes, but wouldn't they be nightmares in real life? And she's a night, because and everyone knows as well, in Jane Austen it's absolutely laid bare. She did all this first that they are all looking out for a husband, and she is doing it so blatantly yes. And
it's funny, by the way, I went to see several versions of it, as we know, but there was some lovely old ladies in the row behind me in one of the versions I saw in Ealing.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't know the piece. I'd heard them talking in the interval, and they said, "We don't know this one, but it's quite funny." But they said, "What do you think of the girl? You mean Rose? She's not a very steady person, is she?" I remember that very clearly.
Yes.
Because by the end of Act 1, she has thrown herself at 3 separate men, normally on the basis of what their financial prospects are.
Indeed.
In fact, it has the immortal line, "Richard, you're the only one that's left.
So I am thine."
Yes, and I think that's a marvellously funny line.
Yes.
She just picks who's the best man in the
world. Well, she even points out, not only she just says, it's down to him that she's not marrying the person that she actually does love, but turns out she has now been revealed to be the wicked baronet.
Whose prospects are not sufficiently
good. So basically, you screwed things up for me, but you are at least a bloke.
Yes.
With
no curse.
With 2 decent legs.
So on the tally score sheet, that's better than marrying someone who is a bad baronet.
Yes, absolutely. Well, she has been brought up the right way.
But it's interesting you think that he's really just throwing a harsh light of reality on the characters. But for me, I think Ruddigore, and I've said this before, is the original irony masterpiece. Because for me, you've got the meek hero, Robin, who turns out to be a wicked baronet, and at least has a go at being a wicked baronet. I mean, he's not able to do it, but in truth, he's a wicked baronet, at least in titular terms.
But he also is meek because he's got a very good reason for being meek. So I'm just saying that it's multi-layered. It is both ironic and it's
genuine.
And it's genuine, yes.
To the nth degree.
Yeah.
Then you've got Rose, who is this demure girl, but she's actually both cold, so that's the excess of what she is, and also a manhunter. You've got Richard Dauntless, who's the sailor character. Now, I think even to this day, sailors are heroic characters in fiction quite often, and he is he's the villain of the piece in real terms.
Yeah.
He's the in a low level, shrewd, cunning way, rather than a high level intellectual planning way. But he's the villain. He's the one with the plans. He's the one who schemes to do people down for his own advantage. He's and he's got a right old glib line as well, because there's this marvellous thing about
his heart.
It's bad to betray people, but because it was the right thing to do, I did it anyway.
Yeah,
the consequences.
It's because what my heart told me to do.
Absolutely. So I love, and it's a perfect piece of double speak. It's marvellous. It is good ironic stuff.
Yeah.
You've got the chap who you've got Sir Despard, who's my favourite character, who's the incumbent bad baronet, who gets his crime over with first thing in the morning and then spends the day doing good. He does good. So he's actually a sweetheart underneath. You've got
it's true that the ostensibly bad or mad characters are the only ones who actually are sympathetic.
Or good or sympathetic.
Yes.
Or sane, in fact.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's basically, as you say, there's levels of irony there. There's levels of sort of hyper-realism there, saying, this kind of character that we all love to love or love to hate in melodrama are just not dramatically sustainable, because melodrama sort of famously has no backstory.
Yeah.
Baddies are bad, and goodies are good, and you can tell whether someone's bad or good because the bad one dresses in black.
Yeah, which is panto.
Yes, indeed.
By the way, I am wearing black as we record this. And it's true.
Because I'm a riot of colour.
It's good. But I do want to just dwell on one more character, and you've mentioned her already obliquely. This is Mad Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the original melodrama, Mad Margaret would have been a fallen woman who would have been, therefore, in Victorian sensibilities, a bad woman. This is a woman who's given herself away sexually before this moment, and has, But Margaret makes it very plain immediately in her song, a beautiful song. She's got lovely songs. That she's not bad. She's merely love lonely. She loves the bad Baronet of Ruddigore. It's unrequited, and she hasn't done anything about it sexually. At least in most interpretations.
Yes, I have seen productions where
she has, but she even has a line in the original text, doesn't she? Saying "Don't call," by which she means "Don't catcall." That's the way I've always interpreted it. She's saying to the audience, "Look, although I'm portraying the mad character who's usually the fallen character, don't judge me yet, because actually I haven't done anything sexual. My sadness is due to genuine love." So she's genuine character, and she's true to her man all the way through. So, once again, it is that irony, and normally that character would die in a melodrama because, sadly, in Victorian theatre tropes...
People got what they deserved.
Yes, no fallen woman can be redeemed, which, of course, we've discussed in other programmes. Gilbert didn't hold any truck with that, and actually wrote straight plays where fallen women could be redeemed and were redeemed, and yet society wouldn't allow them to be. So he was very much ahead of his game there, and in a much more subtle way, Margaret is one of these characters, one of Gilbert's liberal characters, or characters showed his liberal thinking, which, funnily enough, he managed to sneak into a play and succeed with. But unfortunately, the play didn't do very well in this case.
It did all right.
Well, it made him a lot of money.
Yes,
but it was never revived, was it? Yes.
It was never revived. Well, yes.
So that's your cast of characters. I mean, there's a few more as well, but every one of them is not what they seem on first sight. So they're not one note. They are two or three notes. They're not great. They're not characters of great subtlety, but they're meta theatre.
Yes, and I think the thing is that going back to what I said earlier about it being sort of a tough acting thing, it's one of those shows where it may not be obvious on stage, but you really have to have thought about the characters an awful lot to sort of work out where you're coming from, because they are multi-layered. They're all sort of quite crude layers, you could say, but
they are multi-layered.
Yeah.
So that's our sort of cast of characters. We were talking about the weaknesses in the first act. The weaknesses in the second act. But you actually think there are weaknesses all over. I'll tell you why I think the second act is weaker. And the good directors are the ones who are able to hide the fact, so you don't notice it. And the slightly weaker directors, and I've seen a full range of Ruddigores in the last year. Sometimes, I have to say, it was in one. I noticed it most profoundly in one version. I'm not going to say which version. But the second act, which is essentially Robin, now the bad baronet, Sir Rithen Murgatroyd, in his stately home, in his gallery. And it's basically him sitting in the gallery for the entire second act as various characters come in to see him one by one, episodically. There's almost no interaction. Somebody or some people come in, they have their interaction with him, they go off again. Other people come in, they have their interaction with him, they go off again. And it's not really until the end of the act when at least two of the characters merge, which is one of the ghosts and Dame Hannah.
You're quite right there, and yes,
it's very episodic.
You've dragged me back because you're banging on after I attempted to deflect you from your point that Act 1 is marvellous and Act 2 is not very good, and I said, oh no, actually it goes back further than that, because having said that, it starts off as a Jane Austen thing, then even in Act 1 it then suddenly shifts to first Mad Margaret comes on, then Wicked Sir Despard comes on, and almost immediately reveals he's not wicked, he's just he wasn't born that way, he was forced to be that way. And as you say, really with the revelation of everyone's true identity, and basically that Despard is not the wicked baronet anymore, so he can reform, whereas Robin is and has to become evil immediately. That sets things up for Act 2, and really this episodic style of Act 2 is probably, I was trying to think about this the other day, I didn't get very far. It's probably a characteristic of about half the GNS operas are you build everything up in Act 1, you have a massive revelation or change right at the end of the Act 1 finale.
Which sets up
Act 2, and Act 2 is kind of episodic in that it says, right, what was the effect on these characters? What was the effect on these characters? What was the effect on these characters? And then it winds up. So in that respect, I wouldn't say it's inherently any weaker than some of the others, because he tried that trick a few times, and sometimes with more success than others.
I accept what you're saying there, and I can see that. I mean, it's true everywhere, but I just think there's less overlapping. I don't have any problem with let's see what the end of Act 1 has done for our characters in Act 2, but you compare them up in different ways still to illuminate that. But Robin is the only character that counts in the second act.
I think, that's true. I'm not sure whether, I mean, what it boils down to then is just that you accept that it's a series of scenes, and you just hope that each one is as funny as it and effective as it can be.
But Rose and Richard, who have been paired up at the end of Act 1, and Rose is a really significant part of Act. She's one of the dynamics of Act 1. She comes on at the beginning with Richard, sings the song, and then they do not turn up again until the finale. Well, they get a long old time in the green room.
Yeah. Well, yes, but it's
listening
true.
on the baby monitor.
Well, that is true. But so that in a way is that's again part of the template that Gilbert sometimes employs. And as I said, by the fact that I did dare to disagree with you and suggest that maybe the fault wasn't only with Act 2, in a way, if you're saying, well, that's a problem because Rose and Richard have been set up as really important in Act 1, I would agree. And it's the fact that Act 1, for half an hour, or probably more, probably about 45 minutes, is about the triangle between Rose and Robin and Richard, the sailor. And so yes, which is almost an entirely different show from the rest of it. So you've got sort of different elements jostling for attention, and Gilbert fits them together just about as well as you can when effectively you've got two shows running in parallel.
Well, you're right, actually. That's true, because Act 1 is all about the triangle of love, and Act 2 is about this curse. And if there had been no supernatural element in Ruddigore, you could still have had Act 1.
Yeah.
And it just would have had a totally different ending. There's an opportunity for
challenge.
Someone to write a new Act 2 for Ruddigore, which takes out the curse.
And meets with your approval.
No. I mean, in fairness, actually, it's one of the very few pieces of fiction I like that's got supernatural elements to it, just because it doesn't take itself at all seriously. So
can I just ask you then, since you think that Act 2 is weak or has this weakness in it,
has potential to have its weakness revealed, yes.
Well, so why is Ruddigore your favourite?
Well, actually, the answer for that is, you probably heard I got very excited halfway through that conversation already when we started talking about the ironic masterpiece. I almost think, I mean, it clearly isn't the beginning of British irony, it's certainly not the beginning of irony in fiction and drama, but I can't think of any show where irony plays a bigger part, where you are expected to go in a knowing way and have it's knowing all the way through. It's everything on its head. I mean, we're talking Gilbert, we have to say at some stage topsy-turvy, because it is obliged. But topsy-turvy quite often means an element of the plot or some denouement, or, as far as I can see, in terms of the character play, which is what this is, any good surviving play has got enough character in it to make it work, and this has. The characters are very well drawn, but they are all hiding something else. I just love the fact that you cannot take anything at face value. In fact, everything you take at face value, you are required to turn on its head, because that's what's going to happen, and it does happen, and it's forcing you into it. That's what I love. Forgive me, we are both children of the 70s,
yes,
and the 80s was the big irony revival. In fact, it's when that became the basis on how you interpreted everything. John Waters has got a lot to answer for, and here we are, 100 years beforehand, a man making £2,000 out of it, months and months. This is as a speech marks failure, but it ran for months.
Oh yeah, I mean, 288
performances,
probably 6 a week, so that's
a few bob.
Best part of a year.
Yeah. So you've got this. I think, and no other GNS show is quite like it. He never does this quite again. there are characters who are hiding things, and there are characters who are quite the opposite of what they say. But I can't think of any show where every single I can't think of one character, Adam Goodhart.
No, he's fairly genuine, but he embraces
his evil side.
Well, quite, yes. He does his best. He does his bit. Whatever his master tells him to do, he falls in.
Yes, but he does make a splendid steward. Because he's the one giving. Don't forget, at the end of the day, he's even called Goodhart, for goodness' sake. And in the second act, he is the one who gives his master advice on what he should do. He's the one promoting death.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
Poison their beer.
Yeah. He points out that Robin's attempts to be bad are not good enough.
Yes. And he also has this lovely... I mean, he gets a great line from... He doesn't say much, old Adam Goodhart, but he says his lovely line in the second act where he says, well, there you go. What's the point of me giving you advice if you're just going to ignore me? It's a tiny little bit of old age rant and frustration. Yes. I love it.
Grumpy old man.
So, but we've missed one of the big things about the second act. Indeed, this is, in fact, there are two really significant things about the second act of Ruddigore, which I think are... I'm not going to say the saving graces, but are the two things that people think of. And it's hard to believe that one of them was considered a failure at the original time. But I'm going to touch on the other one first, which is the amazing three-way patter song. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Is popularly conceived to be one of the hardest, certainly one of the... Yeah, well, the most difficult.
I'm not sure. Is that hard? There's three people to share it
but
between
the speed.
Yes, it's quite... I don't know.
I've
heard other patter songs go quite quickly, but no, it is impressive. And actually, of course, the thing about it is that does make it stand apart is that, as you've been saying, it's a very sort of knowing, self-referential show, and you have a patter song which ends with the character saying, "This particularly rapid, unintelligible patter isn't generally heard, and if it isn't, doesn't matter."
Yes.
So you actually, yes, it is sort of saying. Well, of course, the irony of that is that Gilbert would kill any performer who delivered his lines in such a way that you couldn't genuinely hear the words,
and it didn't matter.
Yes. Yes.
So that's Gilbert playing, if you like, with his own reputation and his own expectation as well. And funnily enough, just a sidestep into other musical theatre, that is also one of his odd transplantable songs, because it's famously made its way into the Joseph Papp version of The Pirates of Penzance in the 80s, and is therefore in the film as well, with Angela Lansbury. God bless her still living soul at the time of recording. And but also the stage version of Thoroughly Modern Millie. Oh, you're ahead of me here, sir. Yes. So how does it turn up in that?
It's a stenography test, is it not?
It is. Typing.
It's a typing test.
That's right. And so it's also very staccato, because obviously it's staccato for the lyrics, but it also makes a very good sound effect for a typing class. Yes. If you go onto YouTube and you look for it as the typing test, Thoroughly Modern Millie, and you read the comments under the clip, there's a lot of people saying, I didn't know this came from Ruddigore. It's explained where it comes from. And people say, I hadn't realised this was Gilbert and Sullivan. But yes, it already had age on it.
Yes, so, indeed.
Now, we've disagreed slightly, but it is one of the great patter songs. It's one of the speedy patter songs. It's one of the...
No. I was merely saying, the fact that it is delivered by three people is equally impressive, because finding three people who can sing at the same speed, there's almost always someone who attempts to take the tempo down a bit, and so that will always get the music director's arm waving a bit more frantically to get them to keep up.
It doesn't work if you don't do it fast.
No, absolutely.
There are some interesting versions where people have tried to do that. There's a particular choreographic trope that's developed, which you can see a lot on YouTube. Someone's obviously seen the idea and thought that's a good one, where
taking it very slowly,
and they put their arms through the person. So you've got the person who's singing it, and then someone behind is putting their arms through and doing the actions to it, but at half the tempo. And then, if you're lucky, they'll all go around and do it again at the top speed. But I actually think they've killed the song by that. I think it's got to be wham. It's got to be wham bam, get your man, and off you go. I think.
Well, I think that sort of ties in with the sort of thing that these days you don't see many people doing umpteen. You do occasionally, unfortunately, see productions doing umpteen encores of the show, of the songs that are always encored. I personally like to just crack on.
I couldn't agree more.
Funnily enough, you see that in what I would call modern musical theatre as well. If you go and see any version of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Doodah these days, there's a 20-minute, what they like to call a medley.
Yes.
But it just appears because the show's so short, it's like hearing the showing. It's like immediately getting a repeat at the end of BBC Three. And that's not the only one, but... So that's one of the high points of the second act, and it's an undoubted high point. Now, I happen to love the song that Despard and Margaret sing together, but it's not so well known. But the other really significant thing, of course, is what's called the Ghost's High Noon, the ghost scene.
Yes.
And it is, quite rightly, understood as being one of the best, the most impressive and surprising things in the whole GNS canon.
It is.
And was a failure on its first night. So,
it was a failure because some mechanism is required in any production to have the portraits revealing the people behind them, unless you're going to cop out and just have men walking on with picture frames.
We'll talk later about how that scene has been manifested.
So we will. So the original production, I think some of the portraits didn't open properly, and so presumably
the hydraulics failed.
Hydraulics failed.
Because D'Oyly Carte was nothing if not an adventurer on the cutting edge of technology, wasn't he?
He was indeed, yes.
Sometimes you let him down.
Right.
Like he does now.
And as was Gilbert, and which is funny though, because the Victorian theatre that Gilbert sort of tried to, or succeeded in rescuing us from, so that we do have intelligent plays from the late Victorian and 20th century to enjoy, rather than just spectaculars. But the theatre used to be all about spectaculars
and
nothing else, and so you would have sort of scene changes happening sort of before your very eyes, and
they probably
very complex.
But they wouldn't necessarily be mechanical.
No.
But what's your take on the Ghost High Noon?
Well, I do think that if you don't, it's almost the raison d'etre for the show, which it obviously isn't, because we've just discussed all the other things that are great about Ruddigore.
But it's what people sell it on these days.
It's what people sell it on, and it is. It should be an incredibly effective moment. It's also the only thing that the men have to do at all that the male chorus has to do at all in Act 2, and they don't have a lot to do in Act 1. So again, if we're talking about the amateur theatre, then if you want to keep your men on side, then you try to make your ghost scene particularly effective.
Well, I tell you what, they get the best costumes, because they're all in different ones from different eras, aren't they?
Yes. And
Costumier's Nightmare Stroke Dream.
Yes, and of course they should all be from a fairly narrow range of eras, because if we're being picky, then baronets weren't introduced till about 1610.
It's James VI of Scotland, James I of
Yes.
England. See, I know independence is coming. I want to make sure we heard everyone.
Yes. Future-proofing.
Yes,
I think.
So yes, there's a narrow range of costumes, but yes, you do get them dressed up in 18th century costume and 17th century costume. You get a cavalier, and you get people holding their handkerchiefs in a sort of foppish style, right up to the the last Ruddigore is supposed to have died only 10 years ago.
Yes. But as far as the scene goes as well, you've said yourself that Act 2 perhaps can be a bit samey in terms of, obviously it's got the single setting, but it could be a sort of, it's a gloomy castle and just people just coming on, going off. So this really should be, if you have the theatre with if you have the technical wherewithal, definitely you should sort of be putting all your lighting resources you can into making it dramatic. It's one of those numbers that really
pays off if you invest in it, surely.
Yes, and goes to show how you miss these elements if they're not done well. If it's sort of got fairly bland lighting, then the atmosphere is immediately lost, and it's one of it's kind of educative to see a bad production of it.
Yes,
because
you're producing a good one.
Well, no, but just anyway, in terms of just realising how things that maybe you don't, it's like incidental music, as we spoke about, or indeed lighting, or any of these things that really shouldn't be noticeable, but then you see a production of anything, but as I said, it's just sort of particularly noticeable in this, where things are missing, and you think, oh,
Yeah. Why?
You just realise how important they are to establishing the atmosphere as a whole. And it is just about the most impressive piece of music that Sullivan wrote with Gilbert, in terms of musically.
But it feels like no other section of any other Gilbert and Sullivan, is it? Because it's Gilbert being serious without any lightness. I mean, the nice, but it's not a funny. There's nothing funny about it.
I disagree. I think it's quite macabre.
Well, macabre doesn't always mean fun.
No. I was going to come to that, but I was saying it's macabre, but also it doesn't have jokes in it, but it has affecting but sort of light lyrics. Things like when you're talking about the ghost with his lady toast to their churchyard beds take flight, and it's quite poetic.
I think it's very poetic. I'm not getting whimsical. I'm not getting
no. So when I say light,
I mean, I suppose let's talk about how it's set up, isn't it? Because Sir Riven says, "Oh, alas, poor ghost." He feels sorry for them.
Yes,
and then they say, "No, our lot's not quite as bad as you think." And then they go
quite
on
jolly.
to explain but their revels aren't that jolly, are they? They are.
Well,
they're living a parody of living life.
Possibly better than staying in the ground.
Yeah, absolutely inert. Yes, quite. I suppose so. Yeah. No, they have consciousness and they live.
I think the thing is, I think
it's very sad, but in a kind of touching,
it is,
sad.
but it has a sort of it has a party mood.
Oh, really?
I think so. They're singing about the what a great celebration it is.
Once again, I tune it all ironic. You see, because my reading of it, which is really interesting. My reading of it is that it's Sir Roderick, isn't it?
Yes.
Who's the lead ghost who sings the Ghost's High Noon. It's a yes, you're right. It's his answer to everything. Are you having a good time? Pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning we're having a time. It's not all that. Yes, you're right. We sort of get up every night when when everyone else is gone, so we have to do it on our own. We're sort of time limited because we have to go to bed when the cockcrow flies. You've got the very affecting element about the bones that once were women and men.
Mm.
So yes, they're having their revels, and there's but it's a suggestion that it's a weak sort of watered down parody of living life to me. And I think it all ties in with the overall ethos of the ghost scene, where at the end, their very last lines are how they go back reluctantly to their frames. I don't think they're a happy bunch. So,
you see, I think they're happy when they're having their next high holiday. There you are. We can agree to disagree there, but I would counter any of that by saying that even if I agreed with everything you said, it's all ironic. Yeah. So therefore, even if they are really sad, they're singing. They're singing about it. They're putting a brave face on it, and they're singing about it in a jolly way. It is certainly a jolly number. It may be oddly jolly, and it is oddly jolly. I mean, it's not so.
It's not triumphant, though, is it?
But you see, I think the lines about it. I think it's about context. The lines about from grave tombstones are gathered the bones that once were women and men. Maybe it's just because I have the tune going around in my head when I read it. But I think you can take that both ways. If you read it in one context or in one mood, you would think, "Oh yes, that's quite somber." In others, it's quite sort of matter and fact. And
well, I think it's a good example of Sullivan trying to breathe life into it, because he, it's a tempo number. It's a number with some speed to it. It's got lots of lovely. I'm not a musical person, but it's got lovely twiddly bits in it.
Yeah,
twiddly. It's got some lovely strings. It's lush. It's fairly lush. So yes, I think he's creating the feather bed on which some fairly ponderous bouncing is taking place. In my interpretation.
But I don't think it's a ponderous lyric at all. I think it's brilliant. But I don't think it could be set to a ponderous. That's just my take. Well, it's as you say at the end of the scene. There's the sad going back to their frames music, and they come on,
and they say it.
And they come on to that same music, to the lyrics of "Painted emblems of our race, all accursed in days of yore, each from his accustomed place steps into the world once more," and that's I think the contrast is essential. And so I'm sure Gilbert intended
Yes.
the High Noon song to be
Lively.
To be lively, yes.
Although, and he did, of course, because he famously at the time criticised Sullivan for writing what he considered to be too miserable music for it. Did he not?
Yes. Now this is a sort of I think a bit of a fallacy, and it's a stick that is often used to beat Gilbert with. That he did say that he hated Sullivan's music for the ghost scene, and that it was like having 50 lines of Paradise Lost in the middle of a farcical comedy. So therefore, fans of Sullivan and detractors of Gilbert,
of which there are many,
have said this goes to show how completely unappreciative he was of Sullivan's genius. Just look at the music of the ghost scene; it is fantastic, and I would agree entirely. But there is a 3-minute march,
which is now cut,
and it is a complete dirge, in my humble opinion. And I am pretty sure, and I don't think it's just my interpretation. I think I have read it. It was this in particular that Gilbert was talking about. He wasn't talking about, well, how appropriate to me, but it was this that Gilbert was specifically complaining about, and he got it cut. And I mean, I think he was absolutely right from a staging point of view, if nothing else. I mean, he may have said, I think it probably says in the original libretto, sort of march. But he probably didn't expect anything so long or as dull. It really is. I mean, it's a slow march squared. It really would have. It's difficult to imagine how, even if you were trying to put on a tragedy, you could make that work. Yes.
It's just bad, is what you're saying, and it's Sullivan's fault.
Yes. It's. I don't think it's good stage music in particular.
And it's never recorded, is it?
There's one recording. By the new Sadler's Wells in the late 1980s. It may even have been pretty much a centenary recording.
It is. It's the famous Sadler's Wells.
There you go. Yes. Yeah. And they recorded everything, all the cut material, most of which just made you think it was a good thing they cut it.
Oh, right, well, we'll be getting into that.
Right.
That, I think, sets us up very nicely for next week's episode. So, Jerry, thank you very much for talking about Ruddigore for the moment.
Pleasure.
But we will continue fist waving at each other.
Thank you. We shall. Bah.
Musical talk. Well, that was Jerry Purnell in part 1 of our in-depth discussion about Ruddigore. And of course, what we didn't say when we were discussing melodrama is that it's very obvious to see what melodrama actually was, because it is the word melody and drama stapled together. It's all very obvious when it's pointed out to you. In fact, the rules of melodrama are fascinating anyway, and if you ever get yourself 15 minutes, it's probably worthwhile researching it online. Well, next week, we'll be going further on the troubles facing Ruddigore, and we'll be talking about the way it changed over its 124-year life, and how it's the real mix and match Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. It's the one where there have been so many cuts and additions and changes that you can pick almost which version you wish to produce. So I hope you'll look forward to that and listen again next time. But before that, it's probably worthwhile me just letting you know some of the shows which are coming up in London. And this is just a handful of different shows and productions which have caught my eye. Some of which you'll be hearing about in later editions of Musical Talk. And we should start, of course, with another Gilbert and Sullivan, this time Utopia Limited. Yes, it's Jerry Purnell again. He's directing the Century Company's production of Utopia Limited, the penultimate Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. And you know, it's one I've never seen before. I know it from the recording, but I've never seen it. 42 years I've waited, so wild horses will not keep me away from the Greenwich Theatre. Perhaps I'll see you there. Utopia Limited at the Greenwich Theatre between the 7th and 10th of November. www.greenwichtheatre.org.uk. And productions of this one are just not two a penny, so go along if you can. But if you want a more traditional Gilbert and Sullivan, you can see the Gondoliers between the 14th and 17th of November at the Questors Theatre in Ealing. Their website, www.questors.org.uk. But it's not all Gilbert and Sullivan. Man cannot live by bread alone, after all. But I, for one, am spoilt for choice, because there's also one of my all-time favourite musicals, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And you can see that between the 6th and the 10th of November at the Bridewell Theatre at Blackfriars. The website for that is www.saintbridefoundation.org, saint being ST, so it's stbridefoundation.org. And at the same venue, between the 27th of November and the 21st December, at lunchtimes at 1 o'clock, you can see The Happy Prince. Now, The Happy Prince is a musical that's celebrating its 20th anniversary. It was written by Sue Casson and was available to see at this year's Edinburgh Fringe. It's a family show, and if you want to go and see that, go to the same website, stbridefoundation.org. There are other family shows on as well. One opened on the 31st of October. That's The Snow Spider, with a score by our old friend James Lark. And you may have heard the mini episode that I presented about that. That's on between the 31st of October and the 17th of November at the Oval House Theatre in Kennington, www.ovalhouse.com. And what's great about that show is that it's on at different times every day to suit your needs. So if you want to go at lunchtime, the afternoon or the early evening, you can do so. Just go to the website and see what time best suits you. And finally, we'll close with not a show, but with a plug for a CD. You may remember my in-depth interviews with Charles Bloom a couple of years ago. Well, I've recently interviewed him again, and I'm pleased to say you'll be hearing that in a future edition of Musical Talk. But he's got an album out of his work. It's called Music and Lyrics by Charles Bloom, In Here. You can find that widely online, but you might want to go to Charles's own website, www.charlesbloommusic. And there's only one M between Bloom and music. charlesbloommusic, if you like, .com. Well, I'm sure you'll agree you've had quite enough of me by now, so if I were you, I'd turn off. But not before we close with a piece of music from The Snow Spider by James Lark. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2012, except for the music, which was played with permission, and where the copyright remains with James Lark.